We are now live on YouTube.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Rodney Bates. I'm the chairman of the Licensing Committee. Welcome to tonight's meeting. I'm just going to introduce the officers who are here as well. So to my right, here is Mrs. Soper, Frances Soper, the Environmental Health and Licensing Manager. Immediately behind me, you'll recognise Paula Barnshaw, who's the Licensing Administration Officer. And then to my left is Helen Lolly, who is the Licensing Projects Officer. And also you'll see Mr. Scott, who is our Democratic Services Officer, who will make sure that I am kept in check for tonight's meeting. So before we go any further, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies from Councillor Ben Leach.
Thank you. Is anyone else aware of any other apologies? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of October 2021. Does anyone have any issues of accuracy with those? Okay, so you're happy if I sign them then? Brilliant. Okay, thank you. I shall just quickly do that.
Thanks.
Thank you. So, does anybody have any declaration of interest, disclosable pecuniary interests or non-pecuniary interests you may have with respect to matters which are to be considered at tonight's meeting? There are no hands that go up. All right, let's go on then to number 4, Statement of Licensing Policy, which Mrs. Lolly is going to introduce for us.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the Licensing Committee will be aware that the Licensing Authority is required to prepare and publish a Statement of Licensing Policy every 5 years. In addition, before determining the policy, we are required to carry out a consultation on the draft policy. At your meeting in the 21st of October last year, the committee considered a proposed draft Statement of Licensing Policy, and approval was given for us to go out to consultation on the draft policy. At the same meeting, consideration was given to the Cumulative Impact Special Policy, which formed part of the old Statement of Licensing Policy. In line with revised government guidance issued in April 2018, we are now required to review the Cumulative Impact Policy every 3 years. As part of this review, we are required to consult on the Cumulative Impact Policy as in the same way as we do for the Statement of Licensing Policy. Approval was given by the Licensing Committee for us to go out to consultation on the Cumulative Impact Policy at the same time as the Statement of Licensing Policy. Consultation started week commencing 26th of October and lasted 6 weeks. We sent out approximately 600 emails and letters, and the consultation was published on the Council's website. At the end of the consultation period, we received 3 representations on the Statement of Licensing Policy and 2 representations on the Cumulative Impact Policy. Copies of the 5 representations are included in your report pack. Turning to the Statement of Licensing Policy, the draft Statement of Licensing Policy presented to the Licensing Committee in October has been amended to reflect the comments and recommendations made in the 3 representations. This includes taking into account Councillor Betton's recommendations with regard to the wording, etc. of the policy. No further changes have been made to the policy. We are now seeking approval from the Licensing Committee for the draft Statement of Licensing Policy 2021 to 2026 as outlined in the report to go forward for adoption at full council in April. With regard to the Cumulative Impact Policy, 2 representations were received on it in support of retaining the Cumulative Impact Policy. No representations at all were made in relation to removing the policy. Representations were received from Councillor Alan McLafferty and Inspector Alec James on behalf of the police as a responsible authority under the Licensing Act 2003 with responsibility for the prevention of crime and disorder. Again, both representations are included in your pack. The committee is being asked to consider the available evidence and the options with regard to the Cumulative Impact Policy. The options available at this stage are to keep as existing, to amend to reflect the situation, or actually to remove it. There are currently 45 licensed premises within the area covered by the cumulative impact policy. If a decision is made to retain the policy, we're still able to consider applications for licensing within the area covered by the policy. The applicant, however, would need to show through their operating schedule how they would be addressing the issue of cumulative impact. Each case would be taken on its merits. The details of Councillor McLafferty's and Inspector James's representations were discussed at an informal meeting on the 22nd of February. This gave an opportunity to explore the implication of their evidence in relation to the future of the cumulative impact policy. Councillor Bates at the time indicated his support of retaining the policy. As there were no representations in support of removing it, it appears it may be appropriate to retain it in light of the available evidence. Whichever option is chosen tonight, there is a formal process to be followed, which officers within the licensing team will adhere to. We are therefore seeking a decision on the future of the cumulative impact policy with a recommendation that the committee approve the retention of it, we would then keep it under review as we emerge from the current restrictions imposed as a result of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lolly. And just to explain about the informal meeting that I had with Councillor McLafferty and the Inspector, the purpose for doing that was because of two reasons. Firstly, that obviously a lot of the licensed premises were not open during the period of time. So although they were contacted, they may not necessarily have made the representations they would otherwise have done. And the second reason is I just wanted to be reassured that it wouldn't have a wider impact in terms of any plans that the council may or may not have about Camberley Town Centre. So having had that discussion with Councillor McLafferty and Inspector James, I'm personally comfortable to recommend that to the committee. Hence why Mrs. Lolly has just explained that. Does any member have any questions or comments regarding this policy? Councillor Chapman.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm very much in favour of retaining this policy. I was many years ago involved in an application for another nightclub on the High Street, and it's only because I think that we had this policy that we actually refused it. It's very important we keep it. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see either Councillor McLafferty or Councillor Betton on the call, and then neither of the members of the Licensing Committee, but they would have been welcome to make any comments. Does anybody else have any comments they want to make about this? Councillor Mansfield.
Thank you. Just as a point, does the raised hand actually show on the screen?
At the moment, it doesn't.
It doesn't. Not on.
All right. Oh, okay, that's all right. Don't worry. Okay, no worries. Okay, just from a point of view of process, is this a process that will be reviewed after a certain period? So therefore, I have no problem with the implementation with what is being suggested, but what is therefore going forward? Is it reviewed after a certain period? And I certainly agree with Councillor Chapman's point. But I'm just wondering as to what the continual review process will be thereafter, because obviously situations change, and obviously we are coming out of unique circumstances. So I don't want to hold anything back. But can I just ask, is it a continual review? Thank you.
I think you're absolutely right. It will be kept under review, partly because legislation might change, circumstances might change, and we need to be able to respond to any change in the situations to ensure that we do right by both residents and the licensed premises. So I think it's fair to say that it would be kept under review, and that's our intention, particularly as we emerge from the current restrictions imposed by coronavirus.
I do see your hand, Councillor Mansfield. Just to confirm, the cumulative impact policy is every 3 years, I believe.
Yes.
Isn't it? So, yes, Councillor Mansfield.
That's just what I want to hear. And I fully, therefore, endorse what Councillor Chapman just said. But it's just a question of understanding where we go as we're going forward. Thank you for your reply.
Okay, now just to clarify, I would suggest that you don't use the raise hands function tonight. There are enough of us here that I can see if you just raise your hand. So does any other member want to make any points or have any concerns about this item? Nope. Okay, so if I take you to page 7 of the report, and the recommendation is, there's 2 parts to it as follows. So the licensing committee is advised to note the contents of the report and to approve the attached revised draft statement of licensing policy 2021 to 2026 for adoption. And then B, the committee is also asked to consider the options available to members with regards to cumulative special impact policy, and that is to continue with the cumulative impact policy for a further 3 years.
Yes, Chairman, just to confirm, it's a recommendation to council.
Okay, and Mr. Scott has reminded me that that is a recommendation that goes to full council. So that will come, I assume, for April?
Yep.
Yes, okay, so that will come for that. So members, can I ask you to raise your hands if you agree with that recommendation? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much for that. If we move on to item number 5, which is on page 115, and Mrs. Lolly, if you can help us with Hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy, please.
Thank you again, Chairman. In July 2020, the Department for Transport, the DfT, issued new statutory taxi private hire vehicle standards. The document itself recommends that all councils make publicly available a cohesive policy document that brings together all their procedures on taxi and private hire licensing. The draft taxi and private hire policy in front of you has been written with the intention of bringing together all of our existing policies and procedures into one cohesive document in line with DfT guidance. It is likely that the policies, some of the policies, it certainly will be familiar to members of the licensing committee. The draft policy reaffirms that the principal aim of taxi and private hire licensing is to protect children and vulnerable adults from harm and strengthens our commitment to safeguarding all fee-paying passengers. And that was very much a theme in the new statutory guidance issued by the DfT. Before determining our policy, we are required to consult on proposed changes in licensing rules that may have a significant impact on passengers in the trade. Whilst there's very few statutory consultees, we have brought together a list, which I'll explain in a minute. Once approved, we will be consulting widely. If we get approval to go out to consultation tonight, we'll consult widely, and this will include the licensed trade, which currently comprises 40 operators, 217 licensed drivers and 167 licensed vehicle proprietors. Recognising that this is a significant change, we will be arranging a number of meetings with the licensed trade to give them an opportunity to discuss any concerns and suggestions they may have in relation to the draft policy. We're also proposing to consult with ward councillors and parish councillors. And we have also added to the list that you see in the covering report, we've added the Street Angels team to our list of consultees. Okay. We are happy to add to the list if any members tonight have any further suggestions of any group or individuals that we should be consulting with. In addition to our current procedures, policies, we've taken the opportunity to introduce emission and age policies. We recognise that this could have financial implications for the trade, although this is unlikely in the immediate future, particularly if the recommended upper age limits for vehicles is agreed, together with the exceptional conditions criteria as part of this process. At the Licensing Committee in July 2020, it was agreed that there would be an exemption to allow vehicles up to 7 years old to be licensed. We are recommending as part of this report that this exemption remains in place until the new draft policy is adopted. The current fleet of taxis and private hire vehicles, with the exception of 38 vehicles, is Euro 6 compliant. There are limited cost implications for the trade arising from the proposed emissions policy, as vehicles are likely to be on the road for up to 10 years if the draft policy is approved. We recognise that we have a dual role to play in protecting the environment whilst ensuring that there are sufficient vehicles available and the benefits of these policies outweigh the additional costs to the trade. We are hoping that we have achieved these objectives in the new policy, both now and in the future. We will monitor this, I can assure you, closely in the future. We also commit to looking at the feasibility of introducing CCTV cameras in vehicles, but only after consultation with the trade and users. This is in line with the new DFT guidance. Consultation would look to identify if there are local circumstances which indicate that the installation of CCTV vehicles would have either a positive or adverse net effect on the safety of taxi and private hire vehicle users. There are other key additions or considerations which are outlined in section 4 of the draft policy. This includes a comprehensive review of the fees and charges, which we are planning to bring to the licensing meeting in June. The DFT new statutory guidance requires that all individuals involved in determining whether a licence is issued undertake suitable training. The policy itself commits to ensuring this requirement is met for both members and officers. So it's a case of training will be available in the future, and I think that Francis and Paula will probably be working on that. If approved, the only cost implications at this stage for us as the council is the cost of postage and stationery. Consultees will have access to the draft policy through our website. We're therefore asking the licensing committee to authorise us to go out to consultation on the draft hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy as outlined in the report. In addition to, we are recommending that the upper age limit for licensed vehicles is temporarily removed until the new draft policy is adopted. So we will continue with what was agreed in July last year. If given the go-ahead tonight, we will bring the results of the consultation to the licensing committee in June. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Solly. Before I make some comments on this, does any member wish to raise any questions or have any comments? Councillor White and then Councillor Mansfield.
Regarding the CCTV cameras, that's obviously as a cost to the taxi company or the taxi driver, not to the Borough Council.
Certainly, initially, yes, it would be. I mean, we would have some involvement in terms of monitoring and using them to, you know, could be a useful tool for us, but, you know, it depends on the results of the consultation with the trade itself. Mm-hmm.
Councillor Mansfield.
Sorry, just going to use this unmute business. So here's a couple of points. I obviously I'm living in London at the moment. Whenever I get into a taxi in London, certainly there is CCTV within the taxi. Okay, so I'd like to certainly see that going forward. A couple of points are we also pursuing the review as regards more prevalence towards taxis and minicabs that are working on electrics rather than diesel fuels and petrol fuels? And the other thing is, can you just confirm, I recall when I was on a previous chair of the committee with yourself, Councillor Bates, as regards to the vetting process that is still clearly defined going forward for all drivers that are operating within Surrey Heath? Thank you.
I'm going to ask Mrs. Banshaw, I think, to answer that last point.
Thank you. Good evening. So we do vet all licensed drivers in Surrey Heath. They have DBS checks to an enhanced standard, and the adult and children's barred lists are also checked. And we conduct 6 monthly checks in accordance with our policy we brought in last February. Thank you. All the emissions. And to your question regarding emissions and diesel vehicles, there is we have to weigh whether the drivers will be encouraged to purchase ultra low emission vehicles. but obviously there is a cost to that. There's at the moment we've extended the policy to 7 years. If we do go with this policy, and we've in the policy it's for 2030. Sorry.
Just before I bring you back in, Councillor Mansfield, you actually raised the point which I was going to raise anyway, which is just to make everybody aware that it's going to be a really tricky balance when this comes back to us in June, or whoever is going to be on the licensing committee in June, because the balance is going to be between environmental considerations, which we as a council obviously take very seriously with the climate change work that I know everyone supports, but also recognising the financial cost to drivers that may be incurred if they were asked or mandated to follow certain environmental considerations. And Mrs. Barnshaw and myself both attended an LGA event where I think it was Oxford. Was it Oxford?
Yes.
I think, yes, where they have gone down the route of doing a considerable number of environmental considerations for their drivers. I'm not, whether all or some of those would work in Surrey Heath is a matter that we will obviously have to see. But there is going to be a balance on that. And that will be one of the key areas that we want to flag with you now, because you are also members who we want to consult with. You will have your own views, and certainly your constituents will have views, and you will have constituents who are drivers as well. So we want to make sure that they get their chance to have their say, and we've got to try and work out where that balance lies. So Councillor Mansfield, you had your hand up. Did that cover your point, or was there anything further you wanted to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally endorse what you just said. It's about environmental concerns on the one hand, but also it's very much on the public safety concerns on the other. And I accept fully that we don't wish to make it more difficult for people and add to the costs as regards these, cab companies, etc. However, we just have to understand public concerns and liabilities, etc. But thank you very much indeed for the officer's reply. That's made me a lot happier. Thank you.
Okay. Were there any other members who wanted to ask questions or raise any comments about this? I can't see any. I'm just going to confirm that under section 1.6, parish councils will be added to the list of consultees, as Mrs. Lolly said, and street angels, just to reassure you about that point. And also in terms of the licensed taxi drivers themselves and the public hire drivers, we intend to hold a couple of meetings, which I'll be happy to attend as part of the consultation, so they can directly give their views. We do already have meetings with representatives of the trade. The intention is that we would actually hold a couple of remote meetings. The representative meetings have been very good, I have to say, and we'll touch on one of them later on when we talk about Uber. But we will be doing that, so we'll making sure that everybody has their say on this, and I encourage you all to have your say too as part of the consultation process, and then we will obviously wait and see what comes back and come to a decision in June. So I'm going to go back, if there's no further comments or questions, I'm going to go back to page 115 of the agenda, and there are two recommendations for us. So firstly, we are advised to note the contents of the report and to approve the attached draft Hackney Carriage, Taxi and Private Hire Licensing Policy 2021 to 2026 for consultation. And also, we are asked to, that's resolve, I think, rather than recommend, isn't it? It's recommended that I think we can resolve that as a taxi.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, so to confirm that we are also asked to resolve that the upper age limit for licensed vehicles is temporarily removed until a new draft policy is adopted, which members, you'll remember that was a point that Councillor Skipper raised a couple of meetings ago. So can I ask you, if you are in favour of that, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much for that. We now move on to page 235 in your agenda, which is the Business and Planning Act licensing implications. And this again is Mrs. Lolly to introduce for us.
Thank you. In July 2020, the Business and Planning Act 2020 transferred authority to grant pavement licences from Surrey County Council to Surrey Heath Borough Council. These arrangements are due to come to an end on the 30th of September 2021. The government has, however, indicated that they may be extended to the end of September 2022. We will monitor this closely and would update the chairman of the licensing committee if the extension is approved. The changes introduced by the Act in relation to pavement licences were considered by the licensing committee at your meeting on the 29th of July. The report outlining these changes and the minutes of the meeting are included in the report pack. These changes were introduced to make it easier for premises serving food and drinks such as bars, restaurants and pubs to seat and serve customers outside on the public highway adjacent to their premises, whilst at the same time complying with social distancing rules. The committee made a number of resolutions, including the decision to set the application fee at £100, the maximum fee allowed under the Act. This is a discretionary charge, and as the impact of the coronavirus pandemic continues, we are keen to support businesses throughout the current restrictions and phased reopening of the hospitality sector. Following a request from Councillor McLafferty to consider waiving the pavement licence fee, we are seeking approval to waive the fee for future applications and the repayment of pavement licence fees to applicants where these have already been paid. We believe that waiving the fee may be justifiable under current coronavirus restrictions to help bars, pubs and restaurants, etc., open in a sustainable way whilst maintaining social distancing. These arrangements would only apply for pavement licences that expire at the end of September 2021. We will, however, reconsider this if the government extends the current arrangements to September 2022 and update the licensing committee in due course with a view to seeking approval on the way forward if required. No other changes to the arrangements for administering applications for pavement licences are proposed. This includes the informal appeal process that was agreed as part of last year's committee. We have currently received 11 applications to date. That's up from 9 when I originally wrote the report. 5 have been issued, 4 are invalid, either due to the inadequate plans or no public liability insurance, and 2 are being considered and are still within the 14-day determination period. If a decision is made to waive the fees and repay fees already paid, we would need to repay a total of £1,100. These costs would be accommodated within the licensing services budget. In summary, we are recommending that the Licence Committee waive the discretionary fee for pavement licence applications for cases where the licence expires on the 30th of September 2021. In addition, we are seeking authorisation to repay fees to applicants where these have already been paid. That's to ensure that we are fair and transparent for all applicants. If the government's planned extension of these arrangements is enacted, we will provide an update to the Licensing Committee in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solly. And just before I open this out to comments, I can see Councillor Deitch, I will bring you in because I know you have expressed interest in this item. We are intending just to add a few words to the resolution under little I. So where it says the discretionary licence for £100 for pavement licence applications made under the Act is waived in light of the current and ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the intention is to add the words "and until further review by the Licensing Committee." The reason for that is, although there is a time frame on this, that we were a bit concerned just in case it didn't fit in with our committee programme, and so that is the intention for that. But as Mrs. Lolly's explained, these are time bound. So, but the government may change their mind. So that is to cover that supposed wording. So that would be to add the words "and until further review by the Licensing Committee" at the end of little I. Right, Councillor Deitch.
Thank you, Chairman. As you're aware, I mentioned this in our previous full council meeting, and that was based on a representation that I'd received from Parish Councillor Mark Gordon in Bagshot. As most of us will probably know, Mark is a publican himself, and he'd made this representation to me and said that, wouldn't it be a great idea if we could do this and help these types of businesses. So I just wanted to say that I completely agree with all the officers' recommendations and your comments just then about the slight amendment there. So yeah, I think that we should be supporting businesses in this very difficult time, and the cost, as highlighted by our officer there, really in the grand scheme of things is not a massive amount of money. So I think that the council can absorb this quite easily. So this has my full support. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Deach, and Councillor White as well.
Yes, I also support this, but can it be made clear to the licensees that they still have to apply for a pavement license? I've had a couple of licensees ring me up and say, oh, does that mean we can just go ahead and do it then, since we don't have to pay? And I said, no, I don't think so. I think you still have to apply for the license. So can that be made clear, although there isn't a cost attached to it, or there won't be a cost attached to it?
Thank you, Councillor. That's a very good point you've made. And as we've heard, in fact, a number of applications have been, well, they haven't gone forward because the paperwork has not been completed. So I think you make a good point, and it's one I'm sure that the officers have picked up as far as they're able to do. Is there anyone else who wishes to make a comment about this? Councillor Mansfield, is that you're waving your hand there?
Yeah, no, I just totally agree with what Councillor White. I certainly fully support what also Councillor Deach said, but it's also just making the point that Councillor White said as regards making it, you know, clarifying the situation with individual licensees, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to make any comment or ask question? Councillor Brooks. We can't hear you, Councillor Brooks, I'm afraid. Do you want to, you're not muted. Are you giving a thumbs down to us? Is that, you don't like this policy? You do like it? Oh, a lot. Okay. If you want to, I'm happy to try and translate what you're saying, Councillor Brooks, if you want to do it in mine. But I think you're saying that you are a big fan of the policy. Am I right in saying that? If you want to put it in the chat, then it might be. Do you have?
No, I was going to say.
Okay, if you want to put, if you want to send it, I'm sorry, whatever your problem that you have at your residence. If you send your comment to the chat, and then Mr. Scott will.
I was going to say it will have to be Kirsty or Andy.
Oh, okay. What I might do is then ask the officers who are supporting this. So that is Kirsty or Andy, if they don't mind just reading out whatever it is that Councillor Brooks wishes to share with us. So I'll just give him a moment while we get the pearls of wisdom from Councillor Brooks. Is there anybody else while we're waiting for that who wishes to comment? Okay, I will give Councillor Brooks a little time just so he is able to share it, because obviously as the town member it's important that we do get his comments. Okay, Councillor Brooks is, I think, saying he sent it. Oh yes, I've got something come up on the screen. I think only a little part of it. So Kirsty, are you able to read out whatever Councillor Brooks has said there?
Yeah, he said it's important that they apply, so all quantity views will be considered, i.e. highways, etc.
No, that's absolutely right. Thank you for sharing that. You're absolutely right. There is quite an important process to go through, because we need to make sure it's done correctly, and that they don't just put it out and block the highway for disabled individuals and others. So thank you for sharing that. We got there in the end, Councillor Brooks, so thank you for doing that. If you obviously experienced some issues, so if you do have any further comments you want to make, if you do send them to the chat, then we will ask an officer to read it out for you. Right, with that, is there anybody else who wishes to make any comments about this? I can't see any. So if we go to the two recommendations that we have, on page 235. We're asked to resolve that the discretionary licence fee of £100 for pavement licences made under the Business and Planning Act 2020 is waived in light of the current and ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and until further review by the Licensing Committee. And then little 2, to authorise the repayment of pavement licence fees to applicants where these have already been paid to ensure a fair and consistent treatment of applicants. Can I ask if you are in favour of that, to please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Let's go on then to item number 7, which is on page, I'll find it, 251. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Leal to the committee.
Thank you, Chair.
Ask him to introduce the report for us.
Yes, so Surrey Heath Borough Council, in accordance with the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 76, Section 63, and in agreement with Surrey County Highways and Surrey Police, make provision for Hackney carriage stands on the highway in the borough of Surrey Heath. Following the High Street Public Realm project, that has reduced the curbside parking in the High Street from its junctions with Pembroke Broadway to its junction with St George's Road and Obelisk Way. The reduction in curbside parking affects all parking provisions and will reduce the taxi rank in High Street from 7 spaces to 4 spaces. The Surrey County Council's local committee for Surrey Heath agreed at their meeting on the 25th of February to approve the traffic management for this area of the High Street. So the High Street Public Realm works with a £4.4 million project to improve the High Street between its junctions with Pembroke Broadway and St George's, to improve the roads and pavement, and also put in some public art. Due to the widening of footpaths, the curbside parking in this area has been reduced by 50% and has affected all road users. Annex A shows the extent of all the proposed parking provisions for the High Street, and you can see that their element there is for the taxi ranks outside numbers 72 to 90. To alleviate the loss of the parking spaces in the High Street, officers will be looking to identify other areas for taxi ranks. And one area that has been already identified is Pembroke Broadway. And we'll be looking to see if we can put in 3 extra taxi ranks on there when bus stop C is removed, which has been part of the Ashwood House development. And then we're also going to look at see if we can put something else on Knoll Road as well. So asking the committee to agree to the proposal to reduce the taxi rank from 7 spaces to 4 spaces, and that the proposals be advertised in the local paper and online in accordance with the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 76.
Thank you, Mr. Leal. And before I invite any comments, again, there's a slightly revised recommendation to this, which is that 6.1 remains as it is, the wording that you have before you, but that a 6.2 is added, which is in effect summarising what Mr. Leal has said, namely that officers be asked to investigate the replacement of taxi spaces elsewhere in the town centre. So not specifying exactly where that will be, but to ask that those are replaced as far as possible or investigated within the town centre area. So that's a proposal that will go forward. So Councillor White.
I don't want to make waves, but isn't this bolting the door after the horses bolted, or locking the door after the horses bolted? Shouldn't this have been applied for before we went into doing what we've done to Camberley Town Centre? Because we don't have any alternative but to agree this, do we? Because the spaces are just not there for the taxis. I have no problem trying to find other places for taxi ranks, but I just feel that this should have been done before we actually started the work on the town centre.
Yeah.
Councillor Mansfield, just before Mr. Leal answers, are you going to make a similar point, or is it on a different area? Because if it's on the same point, I'll let you speak now, and then Mr. Leal can answer both points.
No, it's a different point, actually.
Okay, in which case I'll come back to you and I'll ask Mr. Leal to comment on that, please.
Yeah. So the original plan was that the Surrey County Council, Surrey Local Committee, were going to discuss the proposals for traffic management on this section sometime last year, around June, July last year. However, due to COVID, that meeting was cancelled and wasn't rescheduled until the 25th of February 2021. We have to get County Council's permission to put in the taxi ranks. So we waited for the County Council to approve the traffic management orders for the limited waiting bays, loading bays and disabled bays. I needed to bring it to the committee because it has to have your approval to take it to advert. So I apologise for bringing it late in the day. But again, we was waiting for the County Council to make their decision on changing the orders for the rest of the High Street.
Councillor White, I think you can be reassured that I didn't know about it until I read the agenda, and the extra recommendation that is being put forward is because I had not exactly the same concerns that you raised, but to some degree this is a fait accompli, and that isn't. I share with you some dissatisfaction around that. I don't believe it's Mr. Leal's fault that's occurred in any way, shape or form, but I think it's something that is not the way we'd like things done, if I can put it discreetly. So that's why I've asked that those can be looked at, and we can try and find 3 spaces elsewhere. Now, there is one advantage, which is, as you know, at that end of the High Street, it can get quite noisy. We do have some residents who live in the vicinity, and therefore a reduction of spaces may be something that they're pleased about. I don't know, I've not spoken with them, but we do need to find 3 spaces elsewhere for when the pubs and clubs do reopen, because we don't want people walking long distances to get home or get to the transport to go home. So that's why that has been added. So thank you for raising the point for us. Is there anybody else who wishes to make any comments or ask any questions about this item? Councillor Lewis and again Councillor Mansfield.
It's just, well, it's a request and a question really. Annex A is being scanned. It's such low resolution you can't actually read it. And the question was, is blue for disabled bays? Because I can't quite make it out on the legend.
Yes, so I'll talk through the various colours. So the purple is the loading bay, which has been installed because all the single yellow lines have been removed. The green is the taxi rank. The blue, 2 blue areas are for disabled parking. And then the yellow is 30-minute limited waiting parking.
Okay, super, thank you.
Councillor Mansfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Leal. First of all, just many thanks for all your help with double yellow lines in Lightwater and Bisley, but that's on a separate note. As regards this particular issue, can I just confirm, because I've sort of looked at the mapping, is there any loss to disabled bays within this area? Because this is all quite new to me as well. So it's just clarification. Is there any loss to the current number of disabled bays that this will impact on? So yes or no? Thank you.
Yes. I think there's, I think we lost 3 to 4 disabled bays in this section of the High Street.
That's not good. That's just not good. Sorry. Thank you.
Well, just to be clear, what we are discussing are the taxi rank and the taxi spaces. So whilst I know a number of members may have concerns about disability, and I would share concerns about that, our concern primarily tonight is regarding the taxis spaces. Okay, I know that other points can go to other committees about that. Now, Councillor Chapman wished to raise a point, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, my query also was on the disabled base, because we've been looking for information on that and we can't find it anywhere. As I understood when we did this planning, that we were going to keep that many disabled bays, but it might look that we're not.
Yeah, I can't off the top of my head remember how many bays. I think there may have been 7 bays in this section of the High Street. I can't remember, but this was all covered by the local area committee on the 25th of February, because it's the county council decision to amend these traffic regulation orders.
Mr. I wonder if you'd be kind enough, I appreciate this wasn't your decision, you've explained it to the local area committee, but I wonder if you'd be kind enough, perhaps after the meeting at some point next few days, just to forward members the decision that was made, just so that we all have that decision. And I know that it's been raised at the licensing committee and it's not strictly a licensing matter, but I think every council would be concerned about that. We've had several who are concerned about disabled areas, and just so that members who want to raise that point further can then do so through the appropriate channels. Would you mind just sending that on to us?
Yeah, I'll send that on and a brief note explaining the process.
Thank you, that's much appreciated. And then I'm sure Mr. Scott can then forward that on to everybody who wish to take that further with whoever they want to take that further with. Okay, is there anybody else who wishes to raise a comment or ask a question about it? I don't see any. So I'm going to go back to page 252, and that is to resolve the following. So we're firstly advised to resolve the proposal to reduce the high street rank from 7 taxis to 4 taxis be agreed. And then secondly, that officers be asked to investigate the replacement of those spaces elsewhere in the town centre. Can I ask if you're in favour of that, to please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. I think we'll carry on with the meeting. So we will go on to item 8, which is going to be very quick because I'm not going to ask for an officer report on this. It's just to report the decisions that have been taken by under delegated powers. There is an Annex A to that as well. Rather than asking Mrs. Barnshaw to make any comments, does anyone have any questions that they wish to raise with that? I can't see any. I did note there was some chat from another member on the last item, but we've moved on. So apologies to that member, but we have now moved on to a different item. So that is just for noting. So I'm just going to ask that we note that particular report. And if we go on then to item number 9. Now, there isn't a written report on this, or indeed item number 10, but we just wanted to update you on 2 areas of information. So the first one is going to be on Uber, which I'm going to give a quick update, and then areas that I miss or get wrong, Mrs. Barnshaw will then add to. But I just wanted to give you an update on this because I know a number of members were concerned about this. So this is Uber licensing update under number 9. So earlier in this year, Mrs. Barnshaw and I had a remote meeting with Mr. Kieran Hart, who is the head of cities at Uber. And the reason for that, you'll recall, was that a number of councillors were contacted by local drivers expressing concern about the implications of Uber in the area. We have taxi and private hire drivers who are licensed by us in accordance with our policy, which we are putting out to consultation. But Uber drivers are not licensed by us, but by Transport for London. So there are a different set of conditions and rules on that. So that was why there was some concern about that. So we were contacted because people were concerned about what they felt was unfair competition and some of the other practices that were being operated. And they asked if we could contact Uber to discuss that. So I did write, as you recall, to Mr. Govers, the Member of Parliament, and to Uber, and Mr. Hart got in contact with us and was very happy to have a meeting. So I'm going to summarise the notes of the meeting, which we have agreed with Mr. Hart, and he was happy to share with you. And we have actually shared this with the driver representatives, but we're happy to put this in the public domain. And because a number of you raised it, this seems the appropriate forum to do so. So firstly, on terms of the boundaries, then up until 2018, drivers working on the Uber app were able to receive trips anywhere across England and Wales, except for London, which was exclusive to Transport for London licensed drivers. At the beginning of 2018, Uber created regional boundaries in its system, which impacted where drivers were able to receive trip requests. The exclusive London zone was extended to Greater London and the surrounding areas and mapped to where demand was prevalent. And TfL licensed drivers were unable to pick up trips outside that region. The region we're referring to, as defined by Uber, does include Surrey Heath. What that means is that Surrey Heath is part of a large boundary area which extends well outside London. We are at the boundary, and it is correct that some neighbouring areas do fall outside. Now, the boundary is not based on any borough or county divisions, just so you're clear. And there were some anomalies that we did discuss and were recognised. I'm not able to share with you the boundary itself because that is commercially sensitive, but we discussed and it was obvious there were some anomalies, particularly around our area because we are so close to the boundary. We did ask Uber whether they intended to conduct a review at this stage, but they have declined to do so on the grounds it is a considerable amount of work to change that, and it was only done 3 years ago. But we did ask that they review the Surrey Heath area when this was next done, but they haven't committed to a time frame for that. And I have to advise you that wouldn't necessarily result in change anyway, but we have asked for a review. We should also note that drivers who may appear on the Uber app, they may be residents of Surrey Heath, but they may primarily work in London and are licensed by TfL. So again, that may be some of the concerns you're experiencing. In terms of enforcement contact, Uber are keen to hear of any concerns regarding drivers. They have a private 24-hour phone line and an email for professional agencies, such as the police and licensing to report, and those details have been given to our licensing team for internal use by officers only. If you, as members of the public or councillors, hear of any concerns, or indeed any of our drivers, then what you should do is to go to our licensing team at Surrey Heath in the first instance, and they can contact Uber or indeed any other operator, because it isn't just Uber, as necessary. Concerns about any customer service issues should go to Transport for London, and any customer who uses Uber they have an app, as you may be aware, they rate the service afterwards, and that is picked up internally. In terms of legislation, one longer term solution, which was actually discussed within the LGA webinar that I did attend, was whether there should be national rules on this to perhaps address some of these issues and make it common across the country. There aren't immediate proposals around that to make it exactly the same at this point in time. And we did say if Uber did have any specific proposals, that we would be happy to consider those as a council. And indeed, we have obviously internal channels with our MP, Michael Grove. And the final point I just wanted to share is that we did agree to have a further review meeting with Uber in 6 months, which will be around the late summer. So, Mrs. Barnshaw, have I missed anything or got anything wrong? Because please feel free to correct.
No, Chairman, you've got everything covered there, I think.
Okay. Does any member have any questions or comment about that? So I know a number of you were contacted and you did express concern privately or publicly. Okay, I can't see any questions on that. So that was just a verbal update on that. And then the final area is, again, a verbal update, which is going to be done by Mrs. Soper, regarding the licensing and environmental health team's update. And I was very keen that we have this so that you got a full understanding of the work undertaken by this team. Some of it we've touched on earlier tonight, but that's going to be a verbal report. There was enough in this agenda already without making it written, which is why it's not written. So but it'll just be a few minutes just to share with you all about some of the work by the licensing environmental health teams. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. At the October Licensing Committee, I provided a verbal report on the Kovid work that the environmental health and licensing team are undertaking. And tonight I'd like to update you with some of the wider work of those teams, including the Kovid work. As members will be aware, environmental health and licensing are statutory functions for the council and are aimed primarily at protecting public health and safety and controlling nuisances. Looking first at the licensing team work, obviously from tonight's agenda, you will be fully aware of the licensing functions that the team are concerned with. And in addition to the public health and public safety aims, they also have further aims with regard to preventing crime and disorder and safeguarding the vulnerable. with all the license areas, taxis, licensing of premises and clubs, gambling premises and charity collections, there are over 700 licenses that are issued. So you get an idea of the scale of the licensing operation. With regard to the impact of COVID, this has had an impact on the work of the team. Obviously, the business sectors that they're licensing have been impacted by COVID, and there has been some reduction in licenses being held. However, there has also been a significant increase in inquiries to the licensing team about how to comply with the COVID requirements. And also the new pavement licensing has brought additional work. And with the anticipated easing of lockdown, there are lots of new license inquiries and new license applications. So this is an area which has brought a lot of work to the licensing team. They also are involved with the temporary event notices, which is an area that as members will be aware, where event organisers can give notice that an event is to take place, and the additional concerns about ensuring any events are carried out safely in terms of COVID means that it's particularly important that the consultation is carried out with other agencies to ensure that they can be carried out safely. Moving on to the environmental health team, again, statutory functions covering a range of activities, which I'm sure you're familiar with: pollution control, food safety, health and safety at work, animal welfare premises licensing, infection control, and of course the new enforcement duties for the COVID business restrictions, which we covered at our last licensing committee meeting. In terms of pollution control, the primary area of work here is about the investigation of complaints from residents about statutory nuisances, which can be noise, light, smoke, rubbish, pest infestations, and also complaints about contaminated land. It was evidence during lockdown periods with people spending more time at home. That brought about an increase in noise complaints and also bonfire complaints. And statistics have shown that there's been almost a doubling of complaints with regard to bonfires, and also a significant increase in the noise complaints. This team also is involved with routine air quality monitoring and to ensure that local air quality is within the prescribed government health standards, and also they are heavily involved in commenting on planning applications to ensure that the pollution impacts are controlled of any potential developments. This team also oversees the stray dog and pest control treatment contracts, and in 2021 to date, 260 pest control treatments have been carried out. And interestingly, stray dog complaints in this year have gone down slightly on the previous year, maybe because more people are at home and their dogs aren't straying. So for this team, anticipated impacts of COVID are greater outdoor hospitality, with, as we've talked about, with the pubs being able to operate outside from the 12th of April, and also people being able to entertain in their gardens, which again potentially could cause an increase in noise complaints. Just moving on to the food safety team. The team is responsible for ensuring food safety requirements are adhered to in 624 food premises, which covers the full range of food businesses, restaurants, cafes, food manufacturers, supermarkets, convenience stores. And the team also carry out the risk ratings and award the food hygiene ratings, which are the green stickers that you'll be familiar with in premises. COVID has obviously impacted greatly on food businesses. A number have had to be shut altogether. Some have moved to be operating as takeaways. However, that still means there is a potential for a food safety risk. And so the team has continued carrying on ensuring that the highest risk activities are inspected and investigated, although there has been an adaptation in the way things are carried out, with some remote interventions going on, but on-site visits have taken place for the highest risk, where if the risk warrants entering a premises, obviously with the appropriate COVID risk assessment in place for the officers. The officers also have been carrying out investigations of food complaints and food poisoning. That has continued. And interestingly, there's been a significant increase in the number of new food premises registrations, largely relating to people wishing to run a home-based food business, ranging from people preparing cakes in their own home to preparing boxes of food and drink that you send out, or actually preparing burgers and doing takeaways from their home. And this is quite a challenge, because obviously there's quite significant implications if someone's using their home premises, which may not meet the standards. There has also continued to be formal action where necessary, for example, service of a notice on a premises that lacked hot water, but we do try and resolve most issues informally, working with businesses where possible. Health and safety at work is obviously an area where the council has enforcement duties, and we're enforcing authority for approximately 1,500 workplaces in the borough. And COVID is an area which in the workplace needs to be covered by the risk assessment. And so the team has been busy reviewing risk assessments, dealing with employer inquiries about ensuring their premises are COVID secure. And excuse me. And also this, the health and safety implications of events is something that's considered as part of safety advisory groups that work with the other agencies to ensure that proposed events can be carried out safely at a time when events will be able to take place. Animal welfare activity licensing, that's an area which involves the licensing of a range of animal welfare activities, riding schools, dog boarding and breeding and daycare premises, catteries, pet shops and animals for exhibition. And we have 40 licensed activities that are, and the licenses are reviewed at varying intervals depending on their risk rating. And lastly, the COVID work. Obviously, I've in my update shown how COVID is impacting on the business as usual environmental health and licensing work, but it also is a significant new stream of work in terms of ensuring that the COVID restrictions, business restrictions, are being adhered to. And this is obviously a significant new area of work. We are working with Surrey County Council Public Health team and Public Health England as well with regard to controlling the transmission of COVID in responding to outbreaks and looking forward. The role of environmental health in contact tracing is an area that is going to be an important part of the enabling lockdown to be eased. We have been using our COVID marshals that started in November to be the eyes and ears around the borough, and they have, together with the environmental health team, visited over 2,000, or carried out over 2,000 monitoring visits, going to retail premises that have been able to open and ensure COVID measures are in place, also visiting to ensure that premises that shouldn't be operating have been closed, and also assisting in the parks and playground areas where there have been some issues around overcrowding and lack of mask wearing, which, although this is a police enforced area, the marshals have been involved in and have been working with the police on this. Again, a graduated approach to enforcement, working with businesses where possible, but formal notices have been used where there have been serious or repeated breaches. And obviously, with the roadmap to recovery, easing lockdown, each stage brings new challenges to the team in terms of ensuring that businesses are aware of what is required of them, and we are keen to help existing businesses to be able to trade safely, and also to help any new businesses to start trading safely. So thank you. That was a whistle-stop tour, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I have got a few people who want to ask. I saw Councillor Mansfield first. I also saw that there was some kind of chat message from Councillor Wheeler who isn't on my screen. So if she is listening to this and wishes to ask a question, she can identify that, or somebody else can read out whatever oh, she is here now. Good to see her. But I will bring in Councillor Mansfield first, Councillor Wheeler, and then Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you indeed to the officer for the update. I'll try and be as brief as possible. I'm looking forward to the barbers reopening, I have to say. Okay, just the first point really, as regards infection prevention and control. I'm just mindful that we're coming out of this pandemic, and I wonder if you could give some sort of reply as to how it is you're going to train people in the understanding as we go forward when we start to reopen as to the conditions that they reopen under. So therefore, it's all about the social distancing. From April the 12th, we're going to be on the outside areas of public houses, etc. So it's the understanding that. That's point number one. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I've got a couple of points. Point number two is there has been an awful lot of local, and I have here within the village in Bisley, of people who've been helping out various households by doing cooking and by providing meals to people from various nationalities, which has been a superb success. These are not revenue generated businesses. These are just helping out people during these difficult economic times. So there's a balance there of understanding. My other point would be, you referred to COVID marshals and COVID marshals within our community. Absolutely, I'm totally for it, but I just want to understand the training they have and the understanding they have as we come out of this pandemic, because it's going to be extremely difficult for a number of of members of our community. So it's really, this gentle sort of reopening, if you like. So if we can just cover those, sorry, it's about 3 points there, but I think they're quite interesting points. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. In terms of the understanding of the controls that need to remain in place with the easing of lockdown, certainly for businesses, that's something that environmental health and licensing will be proactive in ensuring that the businesses are aware. We have done a number of mail shots. We've used the Economic Development electronic newsletter. We work closely with marketing and communications to ensure these messages are relayed and reach the businesses. And in any interaction we have businesses, we're reiterating these points. We also are attending pub watch meetings and reinforcing the requirements. In terms of the wider understanding amongst members of the public, obviously, that's something that the council, through its marketing and communications, are messaging, and obviously the national messaging that's going out around needing to keep social distancing, mask wearing for the foreseeable future. That was the first point. The second point, with regard to those home caterers, and I certainly agree that there has been some excellent community spirited work with regard to catering for the community and helping out, which is fantastic, and we're obviously keen to ensure that's done safely. And not all of those sort of activities you refer to would fall under the Food Safety Act provisions. The requirement to have food registration depends on a number of tests as to how regular it is, and that's something that if it's more of a sort of one-off helping out, it may not be something that requires registration, but we're always keen to give advice and direct people, because nobody wants to be helping the community but causing food poisoning. So, you know, we're certainly not trying to stop people doing good things for the community. In terms of the Kovid marshals, work very closely with environmental health, and their activities are directed by environmental health, and we ensure that they are fully briefed on the latest stage of the requirements, and we have very good communication with them when they're out in the field if they have any concerns or any questions on a point regarding the guidance. Their remit is to engage, explain, encourage. If it comes to an enforcement issue, then it comes back to environmental health for interpretation of the legislation and any necessary enforcement action. I hope that answers your points, Councillor Mansfield.
Thank you. It appears to have done. I'm going to invite Councillor Wheeler now.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. It was actually just following on from communications that I've had from a licensee within the borough, who felt very strongly that actually as a council we weren't actively engaging with them. And in fact, in his case, he felt that he was getting at times misinformation or no information whatsoever. And I just wondered whether or not we had planned or we could consider running a getting ready for opening event for all of the premises within the borough that may wish to actually engage and join with us to hear from us any guidance that we want to give in addition to the government guidance. It's very easy, I think, to refer people back to the government websites, but sometimes that doesn't always give the best impression of us as a borough. And the second question relates to the Kovid marshals, and that is, what plans do we have for actually making sure that the villages and our village high streets and our village premises are included with that, particularly where they are linked to areas of recreation. I know at the moment it's very busy, and I have myself done some gentle reminders with premises in both villages actually that we represent. So I just wondered what plans we had for moving them around the borough, and is it in hand, or are we sticking to Camberley? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Wheeler. In terms of engaging with businesses, that's always something that we're open to ideas about ways to engage. If I understand your question, your suggestion was some sort of engagement event. I mean, that's something that we could consider. Obviously, you know, with the restrictions imposed by COVID, it would have to be some sort of virtual interaction, but that's something we could consider. In terms of Kovid marshals, they certainly have been active in the villages in terms of patrolling to ensure that only essential retail have been operating, and also that the premises that are open in a safe manner. Obviously, there's a lot of places to get around, and they can't be everywhere all the time, but certainly that has been their remit is borough-wide. There are also the Kovid ambassadors that are more town centre based, because they're working with economic development and with the shopping areas, and so they are predominantly Camberley town centre based. The Kovid marshals are borough-wide, and that's certainly something I'll ensure that deployment is something that you know, continues borough-wide as we move forward with the unlocking. In terms of the playgrounds and parks, obviously, the enforcement picture gets a little bit more complicated as we move to the rule of 6, because it's rule of 6 or households of 2 or more, and therefore it's not so easy to tell. You're then getting into issues of, well, who's related to who here, and that's more of a matter for the police if it is a gathering of significance that potentially is posing a threat. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Councillor McGrath, you were shaking your head, so I assume you wish to comment on that.
Yeah, just with obviously being in the village as well, but also actually checking the shops that are in the villages as well, because I have reported a couple of times, but nothing's come back to me. So I don't know if anybody's been out to actually look.
Certainly, if you can provide me with the details, we certainly do follow up any information that we get, and I'm sorry if you haven't had a response.
No, that's fine. But also as well, obviously having a business, and you've sent out the letters which I've received, and obviously done what you're supposed to do. But then when I've actually looked on the website, because obviously last time you said about obviously having the poster up to say that you were COVID ready. I can't seem to find a new one if there is, because it's just got 2020 on it, and it doesn't really explain on the website if any other posters need to go up. It only seems to be from like that one originally.
Okay, I mean, we are reviewing our web pages and refreshing them to ensure that they're ready for the changes that the roadmap.
Yeah, because obviously with the letter that you sent out, obviously with you had to register by the 31st for the COVID test.
Yeah.
So
if you've got any specific queries, then please do email or call Environmental Health or myself.
It's just that looking on the website, you just can't seem to find it. That was all. But yeah, thank you.
I'll take that back.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor McGrath, and also Councillor Wheeler. I can see Councillor Adams in a moment, but I think that's a couple of good points in terms of small businesses and just making sure everyone's got the information that they need. And it is a difficult area, so please bear in mind with officers, it is kind of constantly evolving a lot of this. But nonetheless, it is a fair point to make that businesses are wanting to try and get to know what is going on. So if there are ways that you think we can help with that, then do feed that in. You're welcome to copy me in as well if you want to, just to make sure from a member perspective that's kind of seen as well. Then feel free to do that. Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just really about the COVID marshals / ambassadors in Camberley Town Centre. Firstly, I just wanted to say pass on my huge thanks to the team of these ambassadors who are working under incredibly difficult circumstances at the moment. But also I wanted to know whether there was any avenues for any help for these people that are working there. I've sadly witnessed on 2 occasions, 2 of the marshals receiving horrific verbal abuse in the town centre through just actually asking somebody to put a mask on. And I just wondered if there was any recourse for them to go back to get some sort of help, because it's really not right that they're treated in that way.
Thank you. I mean, in terms of the ambassadors, they report to economic development, but I know that they work closely with the police and the PCSOs, and where they're having persistent problems with individuals with regard to face mask wearing, that's something that they are following up.
Councillor Deitch, I think you wanted to comment on this as well. I might bring Mr. Passion in on that last point as well. But
only to say, and I'm sure I speak for everybody on this committee and the vast majority of local residents, to say that I'm appalled to hear that, what Councillor Adams has just said there. I had reason to be in the town centre a few weeks ago and got chatting to one of the COVID marshals. And while I was chatting, he spotted somebody who didn't have a mask on. And I can't tell you how polite he was when he went up to that person in a very unthreatening way. He kept his distance, and was a model, actually, and somebody who, as a council, we can be very proud of the way that he approached that individual. And as it so happens, the individual displayed a exempt certificate or whatever it is, and off they went. There was no drama whatsoever. But I hope that residents, anyone that may watch the recording of this, and actually I will share it afterwards, these people are only doing their jobs and deserve our support. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I certainly echo that. Any council officer or anybody working on our behalf should always have the respect of everybody. And if they're undertaking duties on our behalf, then we should back them with that. Mr. Passion, I'm sure you've heard there the concerns of members regarding the support for that in terms of the police. So I just wonder, you may have regular comments with the inspector. Do you mind just sharing those reflections from committee members and make sure that they're aware of our support, because we don't want to hear further reports of that.
Yeah, I certainly will do, Chairman. It's I agree with what the members have said and what you've said yourself. It's the COVID ambassadors and the marshals are there trying to safeguard the public, and they're giving advice which has been held down, and for them to get abused, it's quite unacceptable. And unfortunately, some of the COVID ambassadors have decided to call it a day and move on to something else after being trained and wanting to go out there and do that work. But as Francis was saying, that this is very much a police matter, and that is reported back to the police, and the COVID marshals and ambassadors do have a very close contact with the police teams in that area.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I can't say how disappointed I am to hear what you just shared there about people feeling they have to leave their job because of the abuse. That is completely unacceptable. I'm sure every member of the committee would agree with that. And I think it's definitely worth discussing that with the police. We do have to bear in mind many people will be exempt for reasons of medical and all the rest of it. But there is a way to go about this and a way not to go about it. And those officers doing it in a respectful way have our full support. Is there any other questions or comments that anyone wishes to make about the report that has been given?
I mean, if possible, if I could just, I mean, I put my hand up really to say that it was just around about 12 months ago today that the staff, I asked the staff to really change from their existing roles and to move into a more tactical and welfare role dealing with the coronavirus. They all stopped their normal duty, doing stuff which is completely out of their comfort zones, some of them, and they've done really an excellent job. A lot of them have moved back now to business as usual into their various service areas. But there are some areas such as environmental health that there's a new business as usual. Environmental health officers, I'm an environmental health officer of just over 40 years experience, and environmental health are well trained in infectious disease control. That is the main reason why they're in existence, to try to prevent the spread of disease. They have been doing an excellent job during this COVID response, but it'll be a response which is continuing to, that'll be the new norm really, dealing with the coronavirus regulations as they come in. I'd also say there were some excellent suggestions that have come forward about working more closely with businesses, and I think trying to run an event to help businesses, a virtual event, that's certainly something I'll take back to my CMT colleagues and economic development and environmental health, and try and get that set up as soon as possible.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Passion. I can say that I won't say who, but somebody gave a round of applause during that, and another put a thumbs up to appreciate that. And I want to echo your comments. in regard to the hard work of your team. It has been a difficult and challenging year for everybody, but especially for the members you just talked about there. So I'd like to thank them as well as the member lead for this. Members, I'm sorry we didn't have a break, but I'm just aware that we are towards the end of the meeting now. So the final item is just to do the work programme, and that was sent round, item number 11. And so this is the final meeting of this year in terms of the civic year. And you will have seen that we are proposing 3 meetings for next year, the 23rd of June, the 20th of October and the 16th of February. The next meeting is proposed to have the results of the taxi licensing policy, to look at the Gambling Act and to review the fees, which was going to come to this meeting, but we held off because we thought that it's better to do it as part of the wider consultation, and also the 2 service plans. And then in October, the proposal is to look in more detail at the Gambling Act, to review the carriage fees, and then in February to look at street collections and street trading. I know there's some members who are wanting to look at street trading with regard to mobile vans and things like that. So that is going to be something that will be looked at during the course of this year. The only other thing I just want to mention, which isn't on here, but we have talked about, and I did mention at the last meeting, is we are keen to do some hearings training. We, at the moment, don't have any hearings booked in, but there is a possibility that we may have 1 or 2 in the not too distant future. We don't know for sure, but we will wait and see whether or not that happens. And therefore we will be looking at doing some training. That will take place in June or July, we're aiming for, so it will be for those of you who are on the committee next year or the next civic year. So just so you're aware of that. So does anyone have any questions or comments about the work programme before I ask you to agree it? I can't see any, so can I just ask you to indicate your agreement for the work programme for 21-22? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. Not too bad, an hour and a half. So enjoy the rest of your evening, stay safe, and good night.
Chairman?
Oh, go on, Vivian.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. Can I just thank you for the excellent way you've conducted these meetings this year, and all the external meetings that you've been attending. And thank you for the support team that you've got here as well. Thank you.
That's very kind. Thank you for saying that. That's appreciated.
Yeah, I'll second that.
I'm going to let, I know some of you have already started on some